The Galactic Council chamber fell silent when the human delegation walked in. Ambassador Elena Vasquez led her team of 3 through the massive doors, her boots clicking against the polished stone floor. The sound echoed in the vast space where hundreds of alien species sat watching from their elevated seats. High Counselor Vexthan of the Korthani Empire leaned forward in his chair. His 4 eyes narrowed as he studied the small group of humans. They were so fragile-looking, these Terrans. No natural armor, no claws, no venom glands. Yet they had somehow survived first contact with over 40 different species in just 50 years. More than survived. They had made friends with almost all of them. "The Council recognizes the Terran delegation," Vexthan announced. His voice translated through the universal systems into something the humans could understand. "You have requested to speak regarding the ongoing conflict between the Dravaki Collective and the Morvani Federation." Elena nodded and stepped forward to the speaker's platform. She was a woman of average height with gray streaking her dark hair. She wore a simple uniform, navy blue with gold trim. Nothing fancy, nothing threatening. That was the point. "Thank you, High Counselor," she said. Her voice was calm and steady. "We have been watching this war for 3 years now. Over 2 billion lives lost on both sides, planets burned, civilizations pushed to the edge of extinction. And for what?" A Dravaki representative stood up from his seat. His crystalline body caught the light as he moved, creating rainbow patterns across nearby surfaces. "For justice. The Morvani stole our mining rights to the Epsilon cluster 500 years ago. They built their empire on resources that belonged to us." Before he could continue, a Morvani delegate rose as well. She was tall and covered in smooth blue scales, her neck frill flaring with anger. "Your people abandoned those mines. We developed them. We made them productive. You cannot simply claim them back after centuries." The 2 alien species began shouting at each other. Other delegates joined in, some supporting one side, some supporting the other. The noise grew louder and louder until it seemed like the entire chamber might erupt into violence. Elena waited. She stood perfectly still on the speaker's platform, her hands clasped behind her back. She did not try to shout over the noise. She did not demand silence. She simply waited with patience that seemed almost impossible. After several minutes, the delegates began to notice her stillness. One by one, they fell quiet, curious about what this strange human was doing. When the chamber was finally silent again, Elena spoke. "You are both right," she said simply. The Dravaki representative made a sound of surprise. "What?" "You are both right," Elena repeated. "The Dravaki have a legitimate historical claim to those mining rights, and the Morvani have a legitimate claim based on development and use over 5 centuries. Both positions have merit. Both positions have honor behind them." The Morvani delegate's frill smoothed slightly. No one had ever acknowledged their position as honorable before. The Dravaki stood a little straighter, his crystal form humming with something that might have been surprise. "The problem," Elena continued, "is not that either of you is wrong. The problem is that you have spent 500 years refusing to see each other's truth. You have spent so long hatting that you have forgotten how to respect." High Counselor Vexthan leaned forward with interest. "And what would the Terrans suggest? A compromise, a splitting of resources?" Elena shook her head. "No, we do not suggest anything. We ask permission to do something else entirely." She paused and looked around the chamber. "We ask permission to learn." "To learn?" the Dravaki asked, confused. "Yes, we would like to send teams to both the Dravaki Collective and the Morvani Federation. Not to negotiate, not to judge, simply to learn about your peoples, your histories, your cultures, your hopes and fears. We want to understand who you truly are before we try to help you understand each other." The chamber buzzed with whispered conversations. This was not how galactic diplomacy worked. Usually, powerful species came in and forced weaker ones to accept whatever terms they dictated. Sometimes there were wars to determine who was strongest. Sometimes there were economic pressures, but no one ever asked to learn first. "Why would you do this?" the Morvani delegate asked, suspicion clear in her voice. "What do you gain?" Alina smiled softly. "We gain neighbors who do not hate each other. We gain a galaxy that is slightly more peaceful than it was before. We gain the knowledge that we helped instead of hurt." She paused. "And honestly, we gain the chance to learn about two fascinating civilizations. Humans love learning. It is one of our few real talents." The Dravaki representative moved closer to the speaker's platform. "You truly believe you can end this war by simply listening to us?" "I believe that most wars exist because beings refuse to truly see each other," Alina said. "When you look at a Morvani, what do you see? An enemy, a thief, a monster. And when they look at you, they see the same, but you are both so much more than that. You have art and music and stories. You have families who love each other. You have dreams for your children's futures." Her voice grew gentle. "We want to see those things, and then we want to help you see those things in each other." The High Counselor sat back in his chair. In all his centuries on the council, he had never heard a delegation speak this way. The humans were strange creatures. They had arrived on the galactic scene with almost nothing. No great warships, no ancient technology, no psychic powers or natural weapons. They should have been conquered and absorbed within a decade. Instead, they had somehow made friends everywhere they went. Species that had hated each other for millennia suddenly found common ground after talking with human diplomats. Ancient enemies became trading partners. Wars ended not with victory or defeat, but with something far more unusual: understanding. "The Council will consider your request," Vexthan announced. "But I must ask, Ambassador Vasquez, how did your species develop this approach? It seems unnatural." Alina thought about the question for a moment. "On Earth, we fought among ourselves for thousands of years. We killed each other over land and resources and beliefs. We came very close to destroying ourselves completely more than once." She took a breath. "And then we learned. Slowly and painfully, we learned that hatred only creates more hatred, that victory only plants the seeds of the next war, that the only way to truly end a conflict is to transform enemies into friends." "And how do you do that?" the Morvani delegate asked quietly. "You listen to them," Alina said. "You really listen, not to find weaknesses, not to build arguments. You listen to understand. And when you truly understand someone, when you see their pain and their hopes and their fears, it becomes very hard to hate them." The chamber was completely silent now. Delegates from dozens of species sat thinking about these strange words from these strange creatures. "We will begin deliberations immediately," High Counselor Vexthan said finally. "The Terran delegation is dismissed with the Council's thanks." Alina nodded respectfully and led her team out of the chamber. As they walked through the corridors of the Council station, her assistant Marcus fell into step beside her. "Do you think they will approve it?" he asked quietly. "They will," Alina said. "The Dravaki and Morvani are tired. 3 years of war, billions dead. They want it to end. They just need someone to show them how. And if it does not work, if they cannot be reconciled." Alina smiled sadly. "Then we try again, and again, and again, however long it takes. That is what genuine respect means, Marcus. It means never giving up on people, even when they have given up on themselves." They walked in silence for a while, passing other delegations who stared at them with curiosity or confusion. The humans paid them no attention. They were too busy thinking about the work ahead. 3 days later, the Council approved the Terran request. Teams of human diplomats were dispatched to both the Dravaki Collective and the Morvani Federation. The real work was about to begin. Ambassador David Chen arrived on the Dravaki homeworld of Crystallis Prime on a rainy morning. The rain was not water but a fine mist of mineral particles that made his skin tingle. He wore a protective suit, but he kept his helmet off. The Dravaki appreciated seeing faces. His greeting party consisted of 5 crystalline beings who towered over him. Their bodies were beautiful, composed of interlocking crystal structures that rang with soft musical tones when they moved. Each one was unique, their colors and patterns determined by the minerals present when they formed. "I am Overseer Crixful," the tallest one announced. His body was mostly deep purple with veins of gold running through it. "I have been assigned to ensure you do not cause trouble during your stay." David bowed low, a human gesture of respect. "Thank you, Overseer. I am honored that someone of your importance would guide me." Crixful made a surprised chiming sound. "You know of my importance." "I studied the Dravaki hierarchy before coming. You are a 9th-rank Overseer, one of only 12 in the entire collective. You have served your people for over 300 years, and if I am not mistaken, you personally led the defense of the Prism Cluster during the Second Expansion War." The Dravaki stood very still. His golden veins pulsed with light. "You know our history," he said slowly. "Some of it. I hope to learn more during my time here." David smiled warmly. "Your civilization has existed for over 50,000 years. We humans have only been traveling the stars for a few centuries. You have so much to teach us." Crixful studied the human for a long moment. He had expected arrogance. All the other species who came to Crystalli's prime treated the Dravaki as either threats or opportunities. No one ever treated them as teachers. "Come," he said finally, "I will show you to your quarters. Tomorrow we begin your education." The next morning, David woke early and found Crixful waiting outside his door. "You said you wished to learn," the Overseer said. "Today you will learn how our young are born." They traveled to a place called the Genesis Caves, deep underground where the pressure and temperature were just right. David watched in awe as tiny crystal formations slowly grew from the mineral-rich walls. Each one would take decades to reach full maturity. "They do not cry or laugh or move for the first 50 years, Crixful explained. "They simply grow. We visit them often. We sing to them. We tell them stories of our ancestors." "You sing to them?" David asked softly. Crixful's body chimed in a complex pattern. "Sound vibrations help shape their growth. The songs we sing become part of their structure, written into their very being." David felt tears forming in his eyes. "That is beautiful. The first thing they know in this universe is that they are loved." The Overseer turned to look at the human. "You are crying." "Yes, humans do that sometimes when we feel strong emotions. This is one of the most precious things I have ever witnessed. Thank you for sharing it with me." Crixful stood in silence for a long while. In 300 years, no outsider had ever responded to the Genesis Caves with tears. Most barely paid attention. Some had even called the process inefficient. "The Morvani," he said finally, "destroyed a Genesis cave during the Epsilon conflict. 12,000 unborn were lost." David closed his eyes in pain. "I am so sorry. That loss must have been unbearable." "You understand why we hate them now." "I understand why you feel what you feel," David said carefully. "I cannot imagine the grief, but I also wonder, do the Morvani know what they destroyed? Do they understand what a Genesis cave means to your people?" Crixful's light pulsed angrily. "Of course they know." He stopped. "They must know." "Perhaps they do, but perhaps they do not. War often blinds beings to the full truth of their enemies. They may have seen it as only a military target, not a nursery." David met the Overseer's 4 eyes steadily. "Knowing does not excuse what they did, but understanding might change what happens next." The Dravaki was silent for a long time, his crystal body ringing with soft, confused tones. "You are a strange creature, David Chen," he said at last. "I think I understand now why your people sent you. Come, there is much more to see." Over the following weeks, David learned everything he could about the Dravaki. He sat in their councils and listened to their debates. He studied their art, vast crystal sculptures that sang when the wind blew through them. He ate their food, mineral compounds that his body could barely process but which he consumed anyway out of respect. And he asked questions, endless questions. What do you dream about? What stories do you tell your children? What do you fear most? What brings you joy? The Dravaki had never been asked such things by an outsider. Slowly, carefully, they began to answer. And as they answered, they began to realize something strange. The human was actually listening. At the same time, Ambassador Sarah Kim was learning about the Morvani on their homeworld of Azure Deep. The planet was almost entirely covered in warm oceans, with the Morvani living in vast underwater cities. Sarah wore a specialized breathing apparatus that allowed her to move through their world. It was uncomfortable and disorienting, but she never complained. When the Morvani offered to provide a surface habitat for her, she politely declined. "I came to learn about your people," she explained to her guide, a young diplomat named Velsara. "I cannot do that from a bubble above your world." Velsara's neck frill fluttered with surprise. "But the deep waters are dangerous for your kind. The pressure alone could kill you." "Then I will be careful, and I will trust you to keep me safe," Sarah smiled. "Is that not what friends do, trust each other?" The Morvani stared at her for a long moment. "We are not friends, we barely know each other." "Not yet, but I hope we will be someday." Velsara did not know what to make of this strange human, but she had her orders, so she began the tour. The underwater cities were magnificent. Curved structures of living coral and shaped metal rose from the ocean floor. Light filtered down from the surface far above, creating shifting patterns that painted everything in shades of blue and green. Morvani of all ages swam through the water with easy grace, their scaled bodies perfectly adapted to this environment. "How old is this city?" Sarah asked, her voice slightly distorted by the breathing apparatus. "Over 8,000 years. It was one of the first we built when we emerged from the primitive waters." "Emerged? You mean you evolved here?" Velsara's frill flattened with pride. "Yes, we are children of this ocean. Every Morvani carries the salt of Azure deep in their blood. It is what makes us who we are." Sarah nodded slowly. "On Earth, our ancestors came from the oceans too. Millions of years ago, before we learned to walk on land. I think maybe all life in the universe starts in water." "You remember your ocean origins?" "We try to. It is easy to forget where we came from when we travel so far." Sarah looked around at the beautiful city. "But you have not forgotten. This place is a living reminder of your connection to your world." Velsara was quiet for a moment. "You speak as though you respect us." "I do respect you. Your civilization has survived for 8,000 years in an environment that would kill me in minutes. You have built cities of incredible beauty. You have developed technology that works in conditions no human could endure. Why would I not respect you?" "Because we are at war with your project partners. Because the Dravaki call us thieves and murderers. Because the galaxy sees us as aggressors." Sarah shook her head. "I see a people fighting for what they believe is right. I may not agree with all your methods. I may not agree with how this war has been conducted, but I can still respect the beings behind the conflict." They swam in silence through a garden of luminescent plants. The soft glow made everything feel dreamlike and peaceful. "Tell me about the Epsilon cluster," Sarah said eventually. "Not about the war. Tell me what it means to your people." Velsara's frill rippled with complex emotions. It is our proving ground, where we showed the galaxy that we could build something great from nothing. When we arrived there 500 years ago, the Dravaki had abandoned the mines. The equipment was rusting. The tunnels were collapsing. They left it to die. So you rebuilt it." "We more than rebuilt it. We transformed it. We developed new extraction techniques. We found mineral deposits the Dravaki had never discovered. We turned a dead place into a thriving center of trade and commerce." Her voice grew passionate. Generations of Morvani gave their lives to build the Epsilon cluster into what it is today, and now the Dravaki want to take it back simply because their ancestors stood there first. Sarah listened without interrupting. When Velsara finished, she asked quietly, "Did you know that the Dravaki sing to their unborn children for 50 years before they are born?" The question seemed to come from nowhere. Velsara's frill flared in confusion. "What does that have to do with anything?" "I am not sure yet, but I think everything is connected. I think that when we truly understand a people, we begin to see why they act the way they do." Sarah turned to face her guide directly. "I think the Dravaki see the Epsilon cluster not as an economic resource but as an ancestral home. To them, you did not just take a mining operation. You took a piece of their identity." Velsara was silent for a long time. "And what do you think we see?" she asked finally. "I think you see your greatest achievement being stolen by beings who abandoned it. I think you see 500 years of sacrifice and hard work being erased because of an ancient claim you consider invalid. You understand both sides." "I try to. That is why I came here, not to judge, not to take sides, just to understand." They continued the tour in thoughtful silence. Sarah asked more questions as the days passed. She learned about Morvani family structures, about their festivals and traditions, about the songs they sang to the ocean that gave them life. And like David on Crystalli's Prime, she discovered something remarkable. The Morvani were not monsters. They were people. Complex, flawed, wonderful people who loved their children and honored their ancestors and dreamed of a better future. When the two diplomatic teams finally came together to share what they had learned, they realized something important. Neither side truly understood the other. The war had been built on assumptions and old hatreds passed down through generations. The Dravaki saw the Morvani as thieves. The Morvani saw the Dravaki as greedy relics clinging to the past. Neither saw the truth. Ambassador Vasquez listened to their reports with careful attention. When they finished, she asked a simple question. "How do we help them see each other?" The answer would take months to develop, but eventually they found a way. And when it worked, the galaxy would never be quite the same again. 6 months after the diplomatic teams began their work, Ambassador Elena Vasquez stood once again before the Galactic Council. This time, representatives from both the Dravaki Collective and the Morvani Federation were present, seated on opposite sides of the chamber. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut. "Honored delegates," Elena began, "we have spent these past months learning about your peoples. We have walked in your worlds, we have listened to your stories. We have tried to understand not just what you want, but who you are." She paused. "Today, we would like to share what we have learned, not to judge, not to take sides, simply to help you see each other more clearly." She gestured, and a large holographic display appeared in the center of the chamber. Images began to form. First, a Genesis cave on Crystalli's Prime. The tiny crystal formations glittering in the darkness, the soft musical tones of Dravaki parents singing to their unborn children. "The Dravaki do not simply mine minerals," Elena said quietly. "They are literally born from them. Every crystal in a Dravaki's body carries the memory of the songs sung to them before they could even move. When they speak of ancestral lands, they are speaking of the very substance of their ancestors' bodies. The Epsilon cluster was not just a mining operation to them. It was a place where generations of their people were born and died and returned to the stone." The Morvani delegates shifted uncomfortably. Several of them exchanged uncertain glances. The display changed. Now it showed the underwater cities of Azure Deep, Morvani swimming through gardens of light, families gathered to celebrate the turning of the tides. "The Morvani are children of the ocean," Elena continued. "Every cell in their bodies carries the salt of their homeworld. When they expanded into space, they brought that ocean with them in their blood. The Epsilon cluster became proof that they could build something great beyond their world. When they arrived, the mines were failing. The Dravaki had moved on to other places. The Morvani saw an opportunity to create something new, and they poured 5 centuries of hope and labor into making it real. Now the Dravaki delegates looked uncertain. Several of them leaned forward with new interest. "The tragedy," Alina said softly, "is that both of you are right, and both of you are wrong. The Dravaki have a legitimate ancestral claim to the Epsilon cluster. It is part of their heritage, their history, their very being. But they abandoned it. They let it fall into decay. They moved on to other places and left the cluster to die." She turned to face the Dravaki side of the chamber. "And when the Morvani came, you did nothing. For over a century, you watched them rebuild and expand and grow. You only began to care again when they had made it valuable." Overseer Crixville rose from his seat. His crystal body rang with conflicting tones. "They had no right." "They had every right," Alina said firmly but gently. "They claimed abandoned territory and developed it. By galactic law and simple fairness, they earned a share of what they built. Your anger is understandable, Overseer. Your grief for what was lost is real and valid, but your claim is not as simple as you want it to be." She turned to the Morvani side. "And you built something wonderful in the Epsilon cluster, but in your building you erased history. You paved over sacred sites. You destroyed a Genesis cave full of unborn Dravaki children. 12,000 lives ended before they could begin." The Morvani diplomat Velsara stood slowly. Her frill was flat against her neck. "We did not know what it was. We were told it was a military installation." "I believe you, but ignorance is not innocence. You destroyed something precious because you never bothered to learn what it meant to your enemies. You fought a war for 500 years without ever asking why they hated you so much." The chamber was silent. Both delegations sat stunned, hearing for the first time a true account of their conflict. Not propaganda, not excuses, just the painful, complicated truth. "So what do you propose?" High Counselor Vex then asked. "Now that you have told everyone how wrong they are, what solution do you offer?" Alina smiled. "We propose something radical. We propose that the Dravaki and Morvani work together to rebuild the Genesis cave that was destroyed, not as a gesture of apology, not as a payment for sins, but as a shared project of healing." Muttering broke out across the chamber. The idea seemed impossible. These were species that had been killing each other for years. How could they possibly work together? "The Morvani have the technology," Alina continued. "Their underwater construction methods are the most advanced in the galaxy. The Dravaki have the knowledge of what a Genesis cave needs to become a true birthplace. Together, you could create something that neither could build alone." "And the mining rights?" Crixville asked. "The resources, the profits?" "Shared, equally, forever." Alina met his gaze steadily. "The Epsilon cluster would become the first jointly administered territory in galactic history, Dravaki overseeing mineral extraction according to their traditional methods, Morvani managing the infrastructure and trade routes they developed, both peoples benefiting from the wealth that both peoples helped create." "It would never work," a Morvani delegate said. "We cannot work alongside those who hate us." "Actually," David Chen said, stepping forward to stand beside Alina, "you can, because they do not hate you. Not really. They hate what they think you are, and you hate what you think they are, but neither of you truly knows the other." He turned to address Crixville directly. "Overseer, you told me that the loss of the Genesis cave was unbearable, but you also told me that no Dravaki has ever explained to the Morvani what that loss meant. You assumed they knew. They did not." Sarah Kim stepped forward as well. "Velsara, you told me that the Morvani feel like their greatest achievement is being stolen from them. But you also told me that no Morvani has ever tried to understand why the Dravaki care so much about what seemed like abandoned ruins. You assumed they were just greedy. They were not." The two diplomats stood together, representatives of two species that the entire galaxy had failed to reconcile. Genuine respect, Alina said, is not agreeing with someone. It is not even liking them. It is acknowledging that they have reasons for what they do, that their pain is real, that their hopes matter. When you respect someone that way, when you truly see them as a fellow being with their own complex inner life, it becomes very hard to treat them as an enemy. She looked around the chamber at the assembled delegates from dozens of worlds. Many of them had their own ancient conflicts, their own deep hatreds, their own wars that seemed impossible to end. The Terran proposal is simple, she said. Build something together, learn about each other, talk, and keep talking until you start to see the people behind the positions. It will not be easy, it will not be quick, but it is the only way to create a peace that lasts. High Counselor Vexthan stared at the human ambassador for a long moment. Then he did something unprecedented. He laughed. "You humans," he said, shaking his large head, "you arrive in our galaxy with nothing. No armies, no weapons, no ancient powers, and yet somehow you think you can solve conflicts that have lasted longer than your entire civilization." "We do not think we can solve them," Alina said. "We think you can solve them. We are just here to remind you that it is possible." The council voted that night. After hours of debate, they approved the Terran proposal by a narrow margin. The reconstruction of the Genesis cave would begin immediately, with both Dravaki and Morvani working together under human supervision. It would be the first step in ending a 500-year war, and it would change everything. The joint reconstruction project was not easy. In the first week alone, there were 17 separate arguments that nearly resulted in violence. Dravaki workers refused to take orders from Morvani supervisors. Morvani engineers dismissed Dravaki concerns as superstitious nonsense. Everyone expected the whole thing to collapse within a month. Ambassador Alina Vasquez moved to the Epsilon cluster to oversee the project personally. She brought her entire team with her and prepared for a long stay. The turning point came on the 23rd day. A structural problem had developed in one of the new Genesis cave chambers. The crystalline walls were not forming properly. The Dravaki engineers insisted that the pressure needed to be increased. The Morvani engineers insisted that increasing pressure would destabilize the entire structure. The argument had been going on for 3 hours when Alina finally intervened. "Stop," she said calmly, stepping between the two groups. "Both of you stop." The arguing died down. Everyone turned to look at the small human woman. "Overseer Crixville," she said, "explain to me why you believe the pressure needs to be increased, but explain it as though you are teaching a child who knows nothing about crystal formation." Crixville's light pulsed with frustration, but he complied. He explained how crystal growth required specific pressures to achieve proper molecular alignment. He described the frequencies needed for healthy formation. He even demonstrated, his body chiming with the exact tones that would guide the development of the unborn Dravaki who would eventually grow in this chamber. When he finished, Alina turned to the Morvani chief engineer. "Now explain your concerns the same way." The engineer, a large male named Vexthan, described how the existing structure had been designed for lower pressures. He showed calculations indicating stress points that would fail if pressure increased. He demonstrated the specific failures they had seen in similar constructions in the past. Alina nodded thoughtfully. "So what I am hearing is that you both have valid concerns. The crystals need higher pressure to grow properly, but the structure cannot handle higher pressure safely." Both groups made sounds of agreement. "Then the answer is not to choose one concern over the other. The answer is to solve both problems together. Overseer Crixville, is there a way to provide localized high pressure just around the crystal formations without pressurizing the entire structure?" Crixville's light pulsed in surprise. We have never tried such a thing." "Engineer Vexthan, could your people design containment systems that would allow for localized pressure increases while maintaining structural integrity elsewhere. The Morvani considered, it would be extremely difficult. We would need to develop entirely new construction methods. But is it possible? Perhaps with enough research. Alina smiled. Then that is your project, together. Dravaki knowledge of crystal requirements and Morvani engineering expertise, combined to create something neither of you has ever built before. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Crixville took a step toward Vrekthan. You truly believe you could design such a system? He asked. Vrekthan's frill fluttered with uncertainty. I do not know, but I am willing to try, if you will teach me exactly what the crystals need. The overseer extended one crystalline arm. After a moment's hesitation, Vrekthan clasped it with his own scaled hand. It was the first friendly physical contact between Dravaki and Morvani in over 500 years. Over the following months, more such moments occurred. Small at first, a Morvani sharing food with a Dravaki colleague, a Dravaki singing work songs that the Morvani engineers began to hum along with, jokes exchanged across species lines, arguments that ended in laughter rather than anger. The humans were there for all of it. They did not try to force friendships. They did not lecture about peace. They simply created opportunities for the two species to see each other as people. They asked questions. They listened to answers. They reminded everyone, gently but consistently, that their former enemies were just beings trying to do their best in a complicated universe. The Genesis Cave was completed after 14 months of work. It was unlike any that had come before. The localized pressure systems that the Morvani had designed allowed for crystal formations of unprecedented purity. The acoustic chambers that the Dravaki had specified created harmonics that would produce stronger, healthier offspring. Together, they had built something better than either could have achieved alone. The dedication ceremony brought together thousands of Dravaki and Morvani. Ambassador Vasquez was invited to speak, but she declined. This is your achievement, she told Crixville and Vrekthan, who had become close colleagues if not quite friends. We just helped you see what was possible. Crixville's light pulsed with complex emotions. Ambassador, I must tell you something. When you first arrived, I was assigned to watch you and report any troublesome behavior. I expected you to be manipulative, deceptive, interested only in what your people could gain. And what did you find? I found someone who genuinely wanted to understand us, who listened when we spoke, who cried at the beauty of our Genesis caves and grieved at our losses. He paused. I have met many species in 300 years. None have treated us as you and your people have, with, what did you call it? Genuine respect. Yes, that. Crixville made a sound that might have been a laugh. It is such a simple thing, and yet it changed everything. Vrekthan stepped forward. The Morvani Council has authorized me to extend an invitation. We would like human diplomatic teams to establish permanent presence in our territories. We have many questions about your approach, many things we wish to learn. The Dravaki extend the same invitation, Crixville added. Perhaps together we can teach others what you have taught us. Alina smiled. It was a tired smile because she had been working without rest for over a year. But it was also a happy smile because this was exactly what she had hoped for. We would be honored, she said simply. The war between the Dravaki and Morvani officially ended 3 months later. The peace treaty was remarkably simple. Shared administration of the Epsilon cluster, joint development of future mining operations, cultural exchange programs to help each species understand the other, and a single paragraph that both sides insisted on including. This peace is built on genuine respect. Both parties commit to seeing each other as complex beings worthy of dignity. Both parties commit to listening before judging. Both parties commit to building rather than destroying. It was, according to every analyst in the galaxy, the most unlikely peace in recorded history. Two species that had been killing each other for 5 centuries, brought together by nothing more than humans who asked questions and listened to answers. High Counselor Vexthan summoned Ambassador Vasquez to a private meeting after the treaty signing. "I have been watching your species since first contact," he told her, "trying to understand what makes you different. You have no natural advantages, no special powers. By all logic, you should have been conquered long ago." "We have been lucky," Alina said. "It is more than luck. There is something in your nature that makes you. I do not have the right word. You see connections that others miss. You find common ground that others cannot see." Alina thought about the question carefully before answering. "I think it is because we know what hatred does. We spent most of our history killing each other, over religion, over resources, over nothing more than the color of our skin or the language we spoke. We came so close to destroying ourselves." "But you survived." "Barely, and only because enough of us learned that the old ways did not work, that you cannot defeat hatred with more hatred. That lasting peace only comes when former enemies become friends." Vexthan leaned back in his chair. "And you believe you can teach this to the rest of the galaxy?" "We believe the rest of the galaxy can learn it for themselves. They just need to be shown that it is possible." Alina smiled. "Genuine respect is not complicated, Counselor. It is simply treating others the way you wish to be treated, seeing their dignity even when they are different, listening to their pain even when it is inconvenient." Such simple words for such a difficult task. "The words are simple. Living them is hard, but it gets easier with practice. And every time it works, every time enemies become friends, it proves that peace is possible, that hatred is not inevitable." She stood to leave. "The Dravaki and Morvani will struggle. There will be setbacks. Old hatreds do not disappear overnight, but they have taken the first step. And now others will see that first step and realize they can take it too." In the years that followed, Alina's prediction proved correct. Other species came to the humans asking for help with their own ancient conflicts. Some wanted quick fixes or easy solutions. Those requests were politely declined, but those who were willing to do the hard work of genuine understanding found human diplomats eager to help. Not every attempt succeeded. Some hatreds were too deep, some wounds were too fresh, but enough succeeded that the galaxy slowly began to change. Wars that had seemed endless found paths to peace. Species that had been enemies for millennia discovered they had more in common than they had thought. And through it all, the humans kept doing what humans did best. They listened. They learned. They asked questions and treated the answers with respect. They reminded everyone they met that beneath the scales and crystals and strange biologies, there were beings with hopes and fears and dreams. Ambassador Alina Vasquez retired eventually, after 30 years of diplomatic service. Her work was continued by new generations of human diplomats trained in what came to be called the Terran method. The core of that method was written on a plaque that hung in every human diplomatic office across the galaxy. Genuine respect means seeing the person behind the position, listening before judging, building before destroying, and never, ever giving up on the possibility that enemies can become friends. It was such a simple idea, and yet, as the galaxy slowly discovered, it was powerful enough to change everything. The humans had arrived with nothing. No armies, no weapons, no ancient powers. They had only their strange belief that understanding could triumph over hatred, that kindness could defeat cruelty, that respect could transform enemies into allies. And somehow, against all odds, they were right.